Assalamu alaikum. Assalamu alaikum. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. All praises are Allah's, Lord of the worlds. And may His peace and blessings be upon our Master, the Holy Prophet Muhammad, and His pure, immaculate Ahlul Bayt. The dispositions of one's parents, or the spiritual status quo of the parents, or the ethics of one's parents, or the mental and bodily constitutions of the parents, these all, in differing degrees, play and have an influence over the spiritual status quo of the child. It has an effect on the ethics of the child. They also play a role, that disposition, the temperament, the spirituality, the ethics of the parents also play a role on the mental and physical constitution of the child. Even going one step ahead, the spirituality, the ethics, the mental and bodily constitutions of one's parents' parents and their parents and one's ancestors in general, their spirituality of our ancestors, their ethics, they all play a role in relation to the spiritual status quo, the ethics of the child. One step further, in relation to one's parents and their ancestors, the way they thought from moment to moment, the way they acted, the way they behaved, the way they earned money, all have an effect on the child. So the child who's born today, there are 1,001 parameters which play a role in the spiritual and bodily makeup of the child at birth. At birth. The potential starts at birth. But not only of the parents. It's not only the responsibility of the parents here. Even how the grandparents, the great-grandparents, how these people lived, behaved, acted, earned money, their deeds, their intentions. Go back as long as you want. And then they all play a role, especially the parents, but even the grandparents, they all have a role, they all play a role. It's not only in the physical realm, even in the spiritual realm, even in the ethical well-being of the child. Play a role in the production and procreation of the offspring. Even at the time of conception, when the man and woman are active, even how they are thinking at that time, how they are earning at that time, how they are behaving at that time, has an effect on the well-being, both spiritual well-being and bodily well-being of the child. And these are important concepts here. One reason why it's important, because part of our destiny that we make is not in our hands. Part of our destiny, part of it, has been made in the hands of our parents, grandparents. Go back as many generations as you want. It all has a role. It all plays a role. And yes, part of our destiny is in our own hands. Now you may say that's unfair. I'll come to that in a minute. Another important point is the fact that there's responsibility between the generations It's not as if our generation is mutually exclusive to the generation of our parents, which is mutually exclusive to the generation of their parents, which is mutually exclusive. No, they're all linked. This responsibility applies to all generations. Why do we care about the environment for our future generations? There's responsibility there. We care for them. We're responsible. In the same way, how all the ancestors, up to our parents, how they behaved, earned, acted spiritually, acted negatively, their bodily, their mental, all these constitutions play a role in the well-being of this offspring, be it bodily well-being or spiritual. There's responsibility here. So part of our destiny is in the hands of our ancestors. Part of it is in our hands. Now you may say this is unfair. Well, let's first give an example in the physical realm, in the medical realm, and then we'll understand the spiritual side of things. If, let's say, a mother drinks or smokes during gestation, for example, or even before birth, at the time of conception, or even with the father, if they both smoke or drink. And then the child is born without two legs. This is very possible. We've seen plenty of it on the wards. They're born without one leg, without one limb, or with a limb which isn't like the normal limb. Here, that child now is limited. The destiny of that child, as a result of their parents, now he can't, for example, go to the Olympics, for example, or he's limited in different areas. Is it fair? Of course it's not. But it's nothing to do with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is where most people who are weak in faith, they fall here. For some reason they blame Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It has nothing to do with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The parents did something wrong. No, everyone accepts that it was the parents' fault if the child is born without a limb. Everyone accepts the parent smoked, the parent drank, and that now the child is born like that. There no one has a problem with. But in the realm of spirituality, the problem is more significant. They were just physical things. However, when parents sin, when parents earn in a haram way, when parents earn or behave in a haram way, when they act in a haram way, when there's no spirituality, there's no ethics. Go further, even if one's grandparents behave negatively, with no spirituality, and if they sin, go back, keep on going back. There's no difference, it all has an effect. And these sins, this haram earning, this haram eating, and so on and so forth, of our ancestors can lead to physical and spiritual deficiencies in the child. Now, with the physical example I gave, no one says it's not the parents' fault. But there are other problems, there are other diseases, there are other spiritual deficiencies that arise. And it's either because of the parents' sins, what they did, this responsibility has to be transmitted through the generations. You can't look at a generation independently from the previous generation. We don't do that today in this world on secular things, like the environment. No one looks at the environment without studying what the previous generations did. We believe in spiritual genetics in Islam. I'll come with the traditions in a minute. It passes on. And an absence of spirituality can lead to a vast plethora of different spiritual and mental and bodily deficiencies. There's no need to blame it on the jinns or on the evil eye. No, these things, they don't exist the way various cultures believe they exist. That's, as we say in England, that's a cop-out. You're weak in religion. Parents have a degree of responsibility. Haram is the red line. Don't mess with the haram. It'll mess with you. But it's your own fault later. This cosmos is based on cause and effect. Someone acquiring X illness sometime during their lives, and then they blame Allah, that's a weakness of their faith. We don't know what the cause is. We can't speculate. Some people may know. But it's a result of their own actions, one. The actions of their parents, two. The actions of their parents during gestation. The actions of their grandparents, their they all play a role. It's like the person whose mother drinks alcohol and the child is born without a limb, and they blame Allah. It's nothing to do with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala here. You're weak. You don't understand. But the important thing is this thing of responsibility is important. Having children, the responsibility of having them. How you acted before procreation. It's not impossible for someone to be born gay. It's not impossible. It can easily arise as a result of how parents acted. I'll come to the tradition in a minute. Where at the time of intercourse, if the man thinks of another woman, gets excited through another woman, when active with his wife, and explain what the effects of that will be on the son, on the child. See, these things, we have to take note of these things. When the woman's pregnant, they'll do everything. They go to the doctors, they get folic acid and all the necessary medications that they require. That's important for them. But they never care to go to the spiritual doctors to say, look, there are certain actions that have to be done in certain ways at certain times. If you don't, you've opened the potential for catastrophe. Not definitively, but the potential has now arisen. But then they only come to the spiritual doctors when the child has X, Y, Z, spiritual or physical illness, and now they're looking for a miracle. No, it doesn't work like that. It works through responsibility in this world. Now, we see in the verses of the Quran and many traditions of the Ahlul Bayt, we see the logic of what I've just said. This aspect that, this point of responsibility and how children are a product of how parents act. We see it a lot in the traditions. And even they're a product of how previous generations behaved. We have it in the logic of the Quran and in traditions of the Ahlul Bayt. For example, the woman is regarded as Nisa'ukum harthun lakum, as a land of cultivation. Because during gestation, 9 months, it's not a joke. What starts with a unicellular liquid embryo, after 9 months, it's now 3 to 4 kilograms in weight. Where did that 3 or 4 kilograms come from? The way the mother behaved, thought, her intentions, what she ate, Her whole existence is forming this child. It's building this child. It's important in what environment the mother was experiencing those 9 months. It has an effect. Even medical evidence, modern medicine is showing this. Where they've shown that women who, during their gestation, they were in areas where there was a lot of noise, for whatever reason. It led to certain effects in the child. Up to here, even modern medicine has agreed to. It will take some time before they accept the spiritual genetics dimension of Islam. There's one very important tradition where when Amirul Mu'mineen alayhi salam, the night of their wedding with Lady Fatima alayhi salam, then the Holy Prophet gave a set of instructions on the night of the wedding. And we have 2 ma'sooms here. Look how it doesn't matter, even though they're ma'soom, look, it's important that the Holy Prophet gave them a set of instructions before they become intimate sexually. Sexuality is sacred. It has to be governed by the laws of sanctity and the sacred laws of Islam, how Islam sees it. It's a very long tradition, I won't go through all of it, but it's just supporting the idea that there are 1,001 different parameters that play a role in the well-being of the offspring. I'll just recite a few of them. La Ya Aliyo, the Holy Prophet is saying this to Amir al-Mu'mineen. La tujami' imra'ataka fi awwal ash-shahr wa wasatihi wa akhirihi. Don't have intercourse at the start of the month, in the middle of the month, at the end of the lunar month. فَإِنَّ الْجُنُونَ وَالْجُذَامَ وَالْخَبَلَ يُسْرِعُ إِلَيْهَا وَإِلَى وَلَدِهَا. Why? Because psychosis, junoon, skin disease, judham, a kind of skin disease, wal-khabal, I think it means dementia, I'm not sure. Yusri'u ilayha wa ila waladiha. It's transmitted to the mother, from the mother to the child. You see, now this is the spiritual realm now, where Allah knows the rules of the cosmos, knows the effects of the moon and people. There's a relationship. It's not as if we're totally independent from nature. Everything is connected. But we don't care about these things. We just want folic acid. We're just looking for the material well-being of the child. The tradition, it goes quite deeply into various things. It says, if you have intercourse after Dhuhr, what will happen? It will affect the eyes of the child. The potential is there. It doesn't say it will happen definitively. But you, by not abiding by these, you're opening that potential. And that's what you don't want to do that. That's why you have folic acid, for example. Because the potential of certain neuromuscular diseases may arise. The potential, even if you don't have folic acid, there's a much stronger probability that nothing will happen to the child. But you don't want that probability to be increased. You have folic acid. We think rationally there. Here, we don't believe. For example, it says, Ya Ali la tatakallam inda al-jama'. During intercourse, don't speak. Unless it's dhikrullah, but don't speak. And it gives the consequences. And there's many. The tradition is very long. Ya Ali, la tujami imra'ataka bishahwati imra'ati ghayrik. Don't have intercourse with your wife whilst excited with another woman. Mentally. It's just a mental thing. Your excitement is to another woman, but you're active with your wife. فَإِنِّي, because I, أخشى, I'm afraid, إن قضي بينكما ولد, if a son is procreated through you two, أن يكون مخنثا مؤنثا مخبلا, it'll be effeminate. The son will be effeminate. It'll be woman-like. It'll be mukhabbala. I'm not sure what it comes from. Khabal. Maybe it means dementia. If someone knows, they can tell what mukhabbala means. But I think it comes from dementia anyway. Then it says, if, for example, you're pregnant and you have intercourse without wudu, it gives a number of spiritual illnesses. I don't want to frighten you now by giving you all this, because it's quite difficult to absorb all together in one session. But we have to know these things. Now, none of these things which I've mentioned, it's not the case that it will definitively lead to these illnesses. Just a question of you've opened the potential for these to arise. Now, if we are totally oblivious to all this, and then things happen in our lives, and we blame it on the jinn, we blame it on the evil, like nothing to do with those. The jinn have much better things to do than come to us. They don't want to even associate with people. Don't think, you're that honourable that it's a blessing for them to associate with you. They have nothing to do with you. There are instances that things happen, but it's not like some cultures believe today. It's just in the mind. People are just messing around with their lives. So, if a child, the offspring, has a pure mother, has a pure father, and the mother and father had pure thoughts, earned purely, behaved purely, and their parents were pure, they behaved purely, behaved in the best way, they earned in the best way, their thoughts were pure, and their parents were also pure, and their parents were also pure, the offspring will have a complete and perfect destiny, and we call that the offspring has been born ma'soom. That's the definition, and that's the aqli, rational justification of being born ma'soom. That's why the prophets, we believe, were born ma'soom. Now, this is different to when we say children are born ma'soom. That's wrong. Don't say children are born ma'soom. Don't play around with this term. Ma'soom is a specific term. Children are innocent when they're born. You can even say sinless. I mean, it's not as if they've chosen to be sinless or innocent. But ma'soom is something else. It's a product of all those ancestors being pure. Mother and father and their parents go back. As long as you want. They were all pure. The offspring now is ma'soom. That offspring will be in contact with angels, will benefit from angels, will be guided by angels. That offspring will not need an ustad, doesn't need to be schooled, doesn't need to read books. This is how we have to understand ismat, how we have to understand infallibility. Now, the ma'sooms then have to, once after they were born, okay, being born ma'soom had nothing to do with them. It was their ancestors. Now they have to preserve their ismat. That's more difficult. Preserving their ismat is more difficult than having acquired it, because their acquisition of ismat wasn't in their own hands. But the preservation of their ismat is something in their own hands, and it's much more difficult. Now, with us though, somewhere in the line, in our lineages, our parents sin, our grandparents also sin, our great-grandparents sin, and it has an effect on us at birth with the offspring. And therefore we need guidance. We need to go to the lecture. We need to read books. We're not in contact with angels. The Quran says you can be in contact with angels. Me and you. Not limited to anyone. Until the end of time. Male or female. We'll speak more about that later. And that's why we see the stories of the Ma'sumin during childhood. Jibreel would come. Israfil would come. They would benefit from them. They would be guided through them because of that purity at birth. Sometimes you see, the parents aren't religiously abiding. They're not abiding people. However, the child is very good, is very decent. Now, I don't want you to think of examples for yourself. Just think about yourself here. But here, why does that happen? Because sometimes the good actions of the ancestors, the grandparents, the great-grandparents and so on, those effects won't be they won't be unaccounted for. It will be realized in an offspring one day in the future. It will be actualized. And it may be actualized in 1, maybe 5 generations down, 10 generations down. Even if the parents weren't abiding. You look at converts, for example. Do you think it's easy to convert to Islam? Let's say someone converts at 20 years of age. Do you think they did it themselves? Of course not. It's impossible to convert at 20. Don't take it lightly. Converting at 20 years of age, for example, it's almost impossible. No one can convert at 20. It's no age to convert. Especially when you were born in a Hindu, Christian, Jew, what that family, it's not easy to convert. Don't take it, we take it for granted. But that conversion to Islam is something on the brink of impossibility. So how come all these converts convert? See, this is important. It's not only because of their own effort. That's only a part of the equation. That they did some research and they made that decision and it was valuable and it was good. And there's benefit in it for them. Of course, I don't want to take anything away from converts. But look at the converts' parents. That's important. Look at the converts' lineage. They may be canon-abiding Christians. They were Christians who behaved properly, who thought purely. They earned purely. It's possible. They were Jews who abided by the Sharia. They never harmed anyone. They earned it purely. They thought purely. They had good ethics. These actions are going to have an effect on future generations. And all these good actions, somewhere down the line, in one generation, eventually, maybe 5 or 10 generations down, that accumulated good effect led to this 20-year-old converting. And when that 20-year-old, let's say Christian or Jew, whatever, when they convert, all that lineage, all those Christians who have now passed away, the forefathers, of the ancestors of the convert, all of them in Barzakh or wherever they are, they will benefit spiritually from what that child did, that future descendant did. Why would they benefit? Because they were the cause. At least they were partial causes for that conversion. And then just think all the offspring now, the descendants of this convert. Look at the thawab, the reward. Who's benefiting? It's not only that convert. All the preceding ancestors, they're benefiting a lot. It's a day of honor for them when that conversion results. So these are important. Then we see the Sharia also comes and says, gives a few rulings. The Sharia comes and now the Sharia wants to base some of its rulings based on this spiritual truth that has been explained up to now. Now what does the Sharia say? there are some sins that have more of a negative effect on the offspring than others. Sins have a negative effect. Some sins have more of a negative effect, and therefore it will lead to more of a spiritual deficiency. Just because someone's born with a spiritual deficiency, like for example the child without a limb, that's a physical deficiency, but disability. However, we have spiritual disability too. Just because someone is born with a spiritual deficiency, it doesn't mean they can't reach spiritual perfection. Let me first clarify that. As I said, how previous generations behave, earn and act builds the destiny of the offspring to a certain degree. The rest is in your own hands. But some people are born with a head start. It's a reality. Don't say it's unfair. It's a result of how parents acted. Like the child who's born without a limb. That's not unfair. A result of these generations are interconnected with one another. You can't separate one generation from another. That's not the way the world works. That's not how rational people behave in this world. That's not how me and you behave. That's why we care for the environment. If generations were mutually exclusive to one another, we wouldn't have cared about the environment. It doesn't matter how we would behave, but we care. It's important how we act in this world. So just because someone's born with a spiritual deficiency, it doesn't mean they can't reach spiritual perfection. That's also, have that at the back of your mind before I speak about this. The next point. Some sins have more of a negative effect on the offspring than others. One such sin is when the parents give birth to a child out of wedlock, what they call illegitimate children. Now first of all, let me say that in Islam there's no social bias against illegitimate children. None whatsoever. They're just the same as those who are born in a legitimate marriage. They have to be treated the same, and the potential, they also have the potential to spiritual marriage. There's nothing against it. These social taboos and biases we see are all, they emanate from culture, nothing to do with Islam. Anyway, this is a very serious sin though, giving birth out of wedlock. It gives rise to a child, the offspring, with a serious spiritual deficiency. Now, but it wasn't the child's fault. No, but don't blame Allah either. It was the parents' fault. Nothing to do with Allah, don't get excited. Now, here comes the Sharia. Now, the Sharia cares for the guidance of mankind, the guidance and salvation of people. The Sharia knows, because of what the spiritual teachings of Islam dictate, the Sharia knows now that those who are born out of wedlock, they have this significant spiritual deficiency. The Sharia has to behave. The Sharia has to act. It can't be willy-nilly now in relation to this important event. Someone's been born out of wedlock. It's important. The Sharia has to now, for the best interest of mankind, they have to bring around a protocol so that man's best interest and the guidance of man in the community is not compromised in any way. What does the Sharia do? It says, look, in relation to such people, here we don't allow them, out of precaution's sake, we don't allow them to enter professions which are directly related to the guidance and salvation of man. So the marja, they say, they can't be an illegitimate child. The illegitimate child's knowledge may be more than all the marriages. It's possible. Their knowledge may be more than everyone. That's also possible. There's no problem there. They have the potential for spiritual perfection too. All this is there. But something arose at birth where that child was born out of wedlock. The significance of that spiritual deficiency has reached a threshold that the Sharia can't risk allowing it, because they may turn aside. It's possible. It's possible. It's only a potential thing, but the Sharia has to act out of precaution. So in some professions they say don't, and there's not many, 2 or 3 things. They say no, otherwise status-wise they're exactly the same. And this is how you have to choose the successor to the Holy Prophet. You see, in choosing who is the successor to the Holy Prophet, don't follow it because the Prophet said so or there are traditions that said so. This can be a rational endeavor. You choose that successor. There may be many people who claim to be the successor of the Holy Prophet, but look at the lineage. Look at the purity of the lineage. Look at how they were born, how they were brought up. That concept of ismat is a result of previous generations. You want the successor to the Holy Prophet to be ma'soom, so that whatever they say is proof. They're in contact with the angels. Some schools of thought don't believe in ismat of the prophets. They can't do. If they do, it'll be a blow to the whole school of thought. Is it their best interest not to believe in ismat? But we do. The Shia school is very, very adamant on this. Prophets were born ma'soom, and it's because of the lineage. That purity was conveyed from generation to generation. We have it in our ziyarats, in our du'as. In Ziyaratul Warith, we read, لم تنجسك الجاهلية بأنجاسها. The era of ignorance didn't pollute you. Imam Hussein. It did, because your parents, their parents, and so on and so forth, they were all pure. It never had a negative effect. Ashhadu annaka, I bear witness that you, Imam Hussein alayhi salam, kunta nuran fil aslab al-shamikha, you were a light in the sperm of your forefathers. Wal arham al-mutahhara, in the womb of your foremothers. They were all pure. See, that purity was transmitted from generation to generation. And then we had an imam, pure, ma'soom imam. These things are important. This is how ismat, which is an article of faith, has to be justified rationally. Look, aqa'id is rational. You have to understand aqa'id rationally. And there are other, I think there are 10 or 11 rational proofs in relation to infallibility. Okay. Now, one of the actions which also has a very important role in the spirituality of the child is breastfeeding. Now I want to read something that Ibn Sina has written in one of his works. And there's a lot of truths that can be learned from this. Okay, with the offspring, the newborn, there's a potential, a destiny has been assigned to it as a result of how the forefathers and the foremothers, especially the parents, have behaved and how they've lived. Then there's that 9 months where the mother has the main role. And then there's the 2 years of breastfeeding. Now that also has a role. Now, who should breastfeed? Now usually the mother breastfeeds and there's no problem there. In Islam though, in 1400 years ago, breastfeeding, there was a certain culture of breastfeeding, which was prevalent. And it was given the go-ahead too by the imams who were there, and the Holy Prophet. And it's a very interesting culture of breastfeeding. It's totally lost today. But after explaining what the scholars have said, then I'll explain what that country was, and you'll understand why it was like that. So Ibn Sina writes. Ibn Sina was a scholar in fiqh, usul, in irfan, ethics, philosophy, medicine, astronomy, everything. But very strong scholar. Now, what he says, I'm not saying it's 100% vahy. It's not 100% revelation. But at least he's used the sacred text to come, but he's used his own experience too. So don't think that this is 100%. Don't panic or anything. أما كيفية إرضائه وتغذيته, but concerning the manner of suckling or feeding the child, فيجب, it's necessary. It's not a canonical necessity. It's rationally necessary. أن يرضع ما أمكن, to breastfeed however much is possible, بلبن أمه, with the milk of the mother. However much is possible, it's necessary that the child feeds from the milk of the mother. فإنه أشبه الأغذية بجوهر ما سلف من غذائه, because it's the most similar, it's the closest food to that substance which the child would feed upon. وَهُوَ فِي الرَّحِمِ, whilst it was in the womb of the mother, which was the blood. أعني تمث أمه, the blood of the mother. This milk is the closest food to that which fed the child when the child was in the womb. So it's the closest food to that blood. فإنه بأينه هو المستحيل لبنا, and that blood per se is that which was converted to milk. وهو أقبل لذلك, and so this milk is the most befitting for the purposes of nutrition for the child, breastfeeding. وآلف له حتى أنه, it's the most closest thing to the child, to the extent that أنه قد صح بالتجربة أن إلغامه حلمة ثدي أمه عظيم النفع جدا في دفع ما يؤذي, to such an extent that experience has also shown that the actual gripping of the mother's breast by the child, with the child's mouth, it's so beneficial that it eliminates a lot of harm that the child may encounter if this gripping with the mouth did not happen. وَأَمَّا شَرَائِطُ الْمُرْضِعِ سَنَذْكُرُهَا, concerning the prerequisites of the woman who breastfeeds. These aren't canonical prerequisites, they're just rational concepts. We shall mention them later, Ibn Sina says. وَنَبْدَأُ, we'll start بِشَرِيطَةِ السِّنَّةِ, we'll start with her age. What's the best age for breastfeeding? فَنَهُ, and we say, this is with his own experience. This is not from the traditions of the Ahlul Bayt. أَنَّ الْأَحْسَنَ أَن يَكُونَ مَا بَيْنَ 25 سنة إلى 35 سنة. The best age for breastfeeding is between 25 and 35. فإن هذا هو السن الشباب. Can I just ask whether the dua is after or before salat? It's before salat, okay. The best age for breastfeeding is between 25 and 35, because this is the age of youth, the sinna siha wal kamal, the age of good health and the age of perfection. This will be explained in a minute. وَأَمَّا فِي أَخْلَاقِهَا, concerning the ethics of the breastfeeding woman. فَأَن تَكُونَ حَسَنَةَ الْأَخْلَاقِ وَمَحْمُودَتَهَا. She has to be of decent ethics. She has to be of praiseworthy ethics. بَتِيئَةً مِنَ الْإِنْفِعَالَاتِ الرَّدِيَّةِ. She has to be slow, delayed. Delayed in what? In being susceptible to bad ethics. She has to be someone who is not easily susceptible to vicious attributes, to bad ethics. She's strong. She doesn't become deviated quickly. She's delayed in this regard. This is important for the breastfeeding woman. Bad ethics such as min al-ghadab, anger, wal-gham, depression. Here, depression, not clinical depression. It's psychological depression. Because clinical depression, doesn't mean you're weak in faith or you have a weakness of any sort. It's a chemical imbalance, and it may lead to, although even whether there is or not a chemical imbalance, this is something which is very argued now amongst the doctors, and the evidence, I don't want to go into medical debate, but this means here psychological depression, wal-jubn, cowardice, وغير ذلك, and other negative, vicious attributes, negative ethics. The woman has to be someone who's not easily susceptible to being depressed, to being angry, to being scared. This is important, as will become evident. It will pass on to the child. Yes, I'm just thinking about the time. Look, I think we have to continue. I don't want to rush this. There are many important lessons. I mean, it's only 20 minutes, but we'll do those 20 minutes, inshallah, tomorrow, and we'll continue with another theme, inshallah, tomorrow. Wa sallallahu ala Muhammad wa ala alihi.